Life is normally hard, my grandmother insisted, and immediately descended to a sad story about being a Great Depression era mom and only being able to serve a dinner of spaghetti covered with tomato soup. The moral of the story, as always, was you should be thankful. But my childhood was not particularly hard, and suburban kids like me took good times for granted. No spaghetti drowned in tomato soup for me. I insisted upon the wagon wheel shaped macaroni with a red marinara sauce and lightly sprinkled with Parmesan cheese, all from the A&P, of course. Nana said I was spoiled, but Mom always complied with my wishes. Always. Outside, in the larger American world, President Eisenhower had ended wars and built highways, while JFK had rebuffed the Soviets and started us thinking about outer space. Yeah, in the 60s, all seemed upbeat and right with the world, or as a singing mannequin, which I heard at the 1964 World's Fair put it, there's a great big beautiful tomorrow, just a dream away. But my grandmother was correct. Good times were not normal. Perhaps only the old and the very experienced realize this. My sixth grade teacher agreed with my Nana in that regard. Mrs. McBride was a colorful septuagenarian who wore multiple gold bracelets and started each day blaring out Mac the Knife on an RCA Victrola. She had lived through both world wars with the Depression sandwiched between them and rehearsed her experiences with a few tears and without reading from a textbook. Life, she echoed, was hard, and war was hell. Oh, she wasn't supposed to say that. But after almost 5 decades of teaching, Mrs. McBride was the only teacher at Washington School who could get away with it. The fact was, hell had already begun back on November 22nd, 1963, and we were hardly over it when American troops were sent to Vietnam in the spring of 1965. By the time I started high school in 1967, a new word, escalation, was applied to the conflict, which had now turned into a war. That same year, Martin Luther King was murdered and his peaceful vision turned into rioting and mayhem, perhaps most severely in Newark, where my dad and I used to enjoy going to Saturday matinees. But in 1965, I was 12. America was termed the Great Society, and hard times were strictly consigned to the future. Summer that year was going to be hot and beautiful, spent without a care in the world, filled with barbecues, picnics, backyard pool parties, and the like, or so we thought. In the back of our minds, we knew that somewhere in Massachusetts, 17-year-old John Jackson was being put on a Greyhound bus bound for New Jersey, as had happened the last 3 consecutive summers. John was somehow related to our neighbors a few houses away in the old farmhouse which predated most of the post war Cape Cods in our area. He was older and taller than most of my peers on Locust Avenue, with James Dean features and an attitude to match. We had all learned, at all costs, to avoid John Jackson, who seemed to arrive each July with a simple agenda to torment each of us one by all means at his disposal, in front of all our friends until the boys cried for mercy and all the girls giggled at John's virility, and yet never left a mark for our parents to discover. Our mothers and grandmothers, on the other hand, seemed charmed by John, who presented himself to adults as personable and even delightful, to quote my grandmother. By August, I longed for Labor Day or for an early death, whichever came first. This went on for a few summers until the boys in the neighborhood began to mature themselves, and we assumed that John Jackson had come of age and had moved on to better things. But he had moved on to Vietnam. News in our neighborhood moved quickly via the group of housewives that gathered to smoke on our enclosed front porch, the Florida room, my grandmother called it, where amid the gossip and blue smoke, she ruled the place. John Jackson is dead, Nana announced, as if she were a war correspondent, and my mother in the next room became a little teary eyed. But children are smarter than we seem, so while all of us responded to the grown ups with sad looks and such, inwardly we were conflicted. Our neighborhood bully had somehow turned into a tragic hero. I think that we were all legitimately dismayed, but at the same time, deep down, we were glad that John Jackson was gone. No one dared say something like, he had it coming, but we all thought it nevertheless. By 1970, I was 17, still appearing much younger despite having grown tall, lanky, and uncoordinated. Now, in high school, I had exchanged my youthful extroversion for a sort of depressed and cynical introversion, as I looked so much younger than my peers. Though my classmates at North Arlington High School were polite, they kept their distance, and who could blame them? As I strutted around the hallways, my New Testament in hand, as if I were a self appointed judge and they were all miscreants. For some reason, perhaps because he was not particularly handsome, having a big red, usually red nose, one fellow in music class went out of his way to be friendly towards me. Insecure as I might have been, I was drawn towards him. Alan's interest soon became my own, and I awkwardly learned a little trombone as he was the lead trombonist in the band, and comforted him when his mom died, and later at a football game against Mountain Lakes, in which the band stopped playing Georgie Girl after the second stanza, but Alan kept playing by himself. I also indulged his ham radio hobby and talked to his shortwave friends all over the world while he built his first model railroad to appease me. We spent a lot of time together during that summer of 1970, but the fall would bring our senior year in high school and a stark encounter with reality. The office was on the second floor of an ancient commercial building on Midland Avenue in Kearney, the large town just to the south of us. The stairs creaked under us as we approached the entrance door of the second floor, which was painted a glossy black. A brass plate at its center read United States Army Recruiting Command. This was the place where Alan and I were told to report for selective service, commonly called the draft. Fill out these forms, a middle aged woman with frizzy salt and pepper hair said emotionlessly as she handed us two sheets of paper and two well used blue pens. The mimeographed forms seemed like job applications. Date, name, address, phone number, birth date, social security, height, weight, and a brief medical history if known, she said. Now, my sister's boyfriend, David, had previously been through all of this, and he coached me. First of all, don't sign anything. And secondly, leave the preferences part blank, as they'll ignore them anyway. Tell them your preference is not to be involved in any unjust war. I knew that, in the end, my feelings in the matter were irrelevant, so I dutifully filled out the forms and said nothing to the lady, praying that I would not end up like John Jackson. As Alan and I drove home in his handed down Ford Galaxy, I played with the little plastic bubbles on the seat covers as we worried about our futures, but spoke little. We passed by the bronze statue of a soldier that stood in front of North Arlington Borough Hall on our way home. It portrayed a World War I infantryman from the Great War to end all wars. The irony of that statement has never left me. Ultimately, neither of us were drafted into the Vietnam conflict, which finally ended a few years later. David called the entire war a travesty, while most of the older generation termed it a tragedy. My grandfather would always insist that JFK would have stopped the entire affair had he lived. But while my father family did not discuss current events, everyone shook their heads from side to side or looked down at the floor when the footage of the panicked departure of Americans from Saigon filled the CBS Evening News. As for my best friend Alan and I, neither of us attended our high school prom and moved on to attending different colleges. That was a major shift in life, as it is with most young Americans who gradually drift away from high school friends. Almost 2 decades later, in the 1990s, a strange dream about Alan lying in a hospital bed interrupted my sleep, and I determined to find him, which I subsequently did. Alan now rested under a bronze plate on a West Paterson, New Jersey hillside. He had been 34 years old. I tried to send my condolences to his father and stepmother, who, for whatever reason, told me they had no interest. Yes, Nana. Yes, Mrs. McBride. Life is normally hard.